You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got major news in court as an appeals panel has pushed back on Donald Trump's efforts to completely subvert the U.S. Constitution. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, as of right now, the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship is alive and well because a panel of the First Circuit Court of Appeals just affirmed a trial court ruling and opinion that, in substance, Donald Trump doesn't get to take a Sharpie into his tiny little hands and use it to try to cross out of the United States Constitution the guarantee of birthright citizenship. If you're born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. And this opinion is 100 pages on the nose, Brian, but it's so interesting because in an opinion authored by the chief judge of the First Circuit Court of Appeals, he felt compelled to comment on the fact that it was a 100-page opinion. I've got the opinion here, and it's, throughout the opinion, you hear phrases like, it is unequivocally, lopsidedly easy to determine that the Trump administration's view of birthright citizenship is wrong. But here's what he tells the reader up front about the 100-page opinion. He says, the analysis that follows is necessarily lengthy, as we must address the parties' numerous arguments in each of the cases involved, but the length of our analysis should not be mistaken for a sign that the fundamental question that these cases raise about the scope of birthright citizenship is a difficult one. It is not, which may explain why it has been more than a century since a branch of our government has made as concerted an effort as the executive branch, Trump's executive branch, now makes to deny Americans their birthright. I love that he frames it like that up front. He warns the reader that you're going to have to plow through 100 pages, but not because this is a difficult constitutional question. It's not. And I'm going to echo something that a Reagan-appointed judge said about this exact same issue, Donald Trump trying to cross out the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship, a judge on the West Coast, because Donald Trump has lost on this issue from coast to coast. That judge, John Coffenauer, who was appointed by President Ronald Reagan, said that Donald Trump's executive order taking this action is, quote, blatantly unconstitutional. And now the First Circuit Court of Appeals has agreed.
Okay, so Glenn, it's worth asking here, are there any courts, because I know that this was challenged across the country, are there any courts that have opted to side with Trump on this issue? And kind of as an addition to that question, is what Trump is looking for here some kind of circuit split so that there is some inconsistency between courts, and then hopefully he can use that as a pretext to be able to appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court and get them to weigh in on this issue on his behalf?
Brian, if I pose the question to you that, if you had to take a guess with respect to what court in the U.S. might have kind of sided with Donald Trump on the birthright citizenship issue, I don't know, who would you pick?
I would probably guess there are 6 justices somewhere in Washington, D.C. who would love to have a crack at this thing.
Yeah, ding, 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 ding. We've got a winner, because the only court that really seems to show any interest in letting a president of the United States amend the Constitution, which he's not, authorized to do, would be some of the justices of the Supreme Court. A while back, when the birthright citizenship case first bubbled up to them, albeit on a preliminary issue regarding a nationwide injunction, and they issued an opinion that made absolutely no intellectual sense, legal sense, precedential sense. They said, you know what? No nationwide injunctions for you, even though they, in essence, conceded that what Donald Trump did was unconstitutional, and the litigant in that one case won. But for some reason, I guess every other aggrieved human being needs to hire a lawyer, go into court, and get their right personally, vindicated. Which made no sense.
So basically they agreed they agreed with the plaintiff on the merits, but simultaneously eliminated anybody else's vehicle to be able to bring the same case so that they can also have a winning case.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say they agreed with the plaintiff on the merits. Here's the thing. They didn't disagree with the plaintiff on the merits.
Right.
They didn't undermine the judge's ruling that birthright citizenship is a constitutional guarantee that the president can't cross out of the Constitution. But what they did was they didn't like the procedure. They didn't like nationwide injunctions, even though they have been issued in cases that, span multiple administrations. Because the thing is, Brian, you don't need to be a lawyer to understand this. I think you need to be a lawyer to effectively misconstrue this. When something is unconstitutional by the President of the United States, it's unconstitutional with respect to everybody, not just the people who have the means to get into court and have their rights vindicated. But here's the beauty of it, because once the Supreme Court said no nationwide injunctions for you, they cracked the door open to the possibility of dealing with this issue, birthright citizenship for all people, by using a class action lawsuit. And here's what I want to say to our viewers. There were 4 nonprofit organizations that didn't walk into court. They sprinted into court the same day the Supreme Court handed down that horrific ruling, no nationwide injunctions for you. And within hours, I think in less than a day, they had convinced a judge to certify this as a class action, as a legitimate workaround to the Supreme Court's striking down of nationwide injunctions. And let me put this out there. Those 4 organizations, the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Asian Law Caucus, and the Democracy Defenders Fund, Norm Eisen's outfit. Those 4 nonprofits ran into court, and you know what they did, Brian? They represented the interests of all the American people, which is why I say we need to be supporting in every way we can the nonprofit organizations like those 4 that are in a very real sense our lawyers. They're representing and forwarding our interests, and they're winning. So, those are points of light. We have organizations out there fighting for what's right. And what they did was they convinced the judge to certify a class, and that class includes every infant born on U.S. soil on or after February 20th, I believe, or 25th, I forget the exact date. No, February 20th, 2025. That was the date Trump signed the executive order. And all infants who may be born in the future. So infants born and yet to be born are members of the class, and that is courtesy of the amazing work of those 4 nonprofit organizations.
Well, look, I want to take this opportunity for everybody who's speaking truth to power in the legal profession, including you. These are the people that we need to support. So for anybody right now who is not yet subscribed to Glenn's YouTube channel, for anybody who's not subscribed to this YouTube channel, we are covering this on a daily basis. So please go ahead and subscribe. It's not only a great way to support our work, but it's completely free and a great way to support independent media. So I'm going to put those links in the post description of this video. If you're not yet subscribed, please go ahead, support our work, and subscribe. Glenn, it's worth asking here, now that we have this brand new decision from the First Circuit Court of Appeals, is the next step then, as far as you would imagine, that the Trump administration would appeal this up to the Supreme Court? Do you have any reason to believe that they wouldn't? Is there, for example, some danger in doing so? Because once the Supreme Court sees all of these circuit court rulings and trial court rulings reaffirming the right to birthright citizenship, that if the Supreme Court does rule on this thing and says, no, we agree with the lower courts here, then it's just game over for Trump.
Yeah, there are 3 possibilities. 1, they can ask the First Circuit Court of Appeals for en banc review, rehearing, full court, meaning all of the appellate court judges, not just the 3 that just handed down this opinion. That's one route they could go. The second route, they could ask the Supreme Court to accept the case for review, and I will bet my full buck, that's my betting limit, that they will do that. Or, of course, they could decline to ask the Supreme Court to review this case and wait for one of the other birthright citizenship cases, because there are several across the country. The one that I mentioned on the West Coast that Judge Coffenauer decided, maybe they think they have a better record established in one of those other jurisdictions, or maybe they want to wait to see how those other cases work their way from the trial court to the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, to see if perhaps they can come up with an argument that, well, the two Federal Circuit Courts of Appeal that have addressed this case and resolved it are in conflict, because that's a sure reason for the Supreme Court to accept review of the case, because we need uniformity across all of the Federal Circuit Courts. I suspect what you're going to see is they're going to decline to ask for en banc review. They're not going to wait. You're going to see them want to get this thing up to the Supreme Court pronto. And why wouldn't they, with the 6-justice right-wing majority seeming to be forever willing to expand Donald Trump's power, laws, and Constitution be damned?
You had explained in a previous case where the judges on the Supreme Court did not disagree with the lower court's ruling, even though they took away the vehicle to be able to do nationwide injunctions so that other parties could be a party to that ruling. That notwithstanding, is there anything that would suggest that the Supreme Court actually would defer to Trump, other than, of course, all of the other rulings where they've deferred to Trump? But is there anything specific in this case that you know of that might suggest that Trump would be successful here in the hands of this 6-judge majority on the court?
You know, Brian, it's impossible to predict what the Supreme Court will do, because on the one hand, you have the express text of the Constitution, and you have decades, if not centuries, of precedent saying that the Constitution means what it says. If you're born here, right, you're a citizen. And that used to win the day in the minds of attorneys who are trying to predict what the Supreme Court might do. On the other hand, you now have, a whole string of cases where they have done the inexplicable, in fact, where they have contradicted the express language of the Constitution, like in the presidential immunity case. And there are so many cases where Donald Trump has, for example, stolen the power of the purse from Congress in what looks like an easy call for any judges, and those calls typically are easy for trial court judges and judges on the courts of appeal. And then the Supreme Court, albeit in a preliminary posture, says, no, we're going to let Donald Trump continue to violate federal law, continue to violate the sort of separation of powers and the system of checks and balances that we have. We're going to let him do it. Their excuse is because we haven't yet received this case on the merits. We'll get to that in the future, but it would seem to me that the Supreme Court should and really must, in my opinion, say, yeah, but this is unlawful or unconstitutional, so we're going to maintain the status quo, which is that the Trump administration can't violate the law or the Constitution while these cases work their way through the system. But they've done the exact opposite. So when you put those two things on the scale, I'm going to say that the lack of loyalty to even the express language of the Constitution, demonstrated repeatedly by the 6-justice majority, will probably outweigh the Constitution.
All right. Well, we will, of course, stay on top of this as this case and other analogous cases continue to work their way through the legal system. Again, for those who are watching right now, if you'd like to follow along with this legal news and support our work, which is and always will be 100% free, please subscribe to our channels. I'm going to put the links to both of our channels right here on the screen. Again, a great way to support us, a great way to support independent media. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.